echo with, I can just mention Walmart, for example, procurement policy, and then generate positive externalities, and then spill over to other companies, and then overall enhance the CSR standard of a country. So basically, this view actually comes from a lot of literature that first look at multinational corporations as agent for change for local institutions. Okay, in the IB, international business literature, a lot of article talks about this. Okay, well, multinational company entering into a host country and then impose a superior international standard which affect other corporations. And then these corporations even lobby the government to enact the law because they want fair, a leveling playing ground. Okay, so the corporation as a political actor, they can contribute directly to public goods provision in countries and industries they operate. So, for example, the leading companies who are well known for their CSR programs, they may demand the leveled playing field for all players, especially when they operate in opaque regulatory environment. So in other words, this view, to summarize, it sees that the main drivers of government regulation of CSR should be leading countries. Okay, they are the push factors. Okay, they lobby the government to do something that unify the standards. So these two views actually have different hypotheses. Yes, please.
Sorry, to interrupt.
Yes.
Can you give an example of the third one? Demanding a level playing field, which players for other companies?
Yes. For example, in paper I cited the Nelson and Brown. They show that leading companies in UK and Denmark in the extractive industry sector and Denmark's pharmaceutical sectors, they are proposing the government to regulate their respective sector by setting the standard. So they are doing lobbying. In their paper, they give this concrete example.
From a CSR perspective, from a business industry perspective?
From the CSR perspective.
Okay.
Yes. So there are indeed the concrete cases on that. So this is the second political actors view. The third view is called national competitiveness view. So basically, this view argues that the governments actively pursue the CSR regulation as a, we call it, value capturing strategy. Why is it called value capturing? So in other words, the government thinks that pursuing a CSR regulation can create value, okay? Can make us more competitive in international business. So they use the CSR regulation as value capturing strategy, positioning strategy, or differentiation strategy. So what exactly does it work? For example, there are many studies to show that practicing CSR really creates value. Okay, so these values are often related to the innovative solutions. So we don't think the CSR is just some spending, money spending, philanthropy things. Okay, it's really require you to systematically overview how your business is operated, where you can save cost. Okay, how to optimize your whole production process. So this is associated with innovative solutions to the more effective use of resources, cost reduction, improves productivity. So if you genuinely, okay, implement CSR, there are value enhanced benefits. And moreover, this is our real benefits, okay? Socially responsible investment. We know that SRI has developed from a previously a niche market to the mainstream now. Now the major investors are looking at the companies that practicing a sustainable way to invest. So from a government's perspective, especially a small government like Hong Kong, Singapore, if you want to attract these, we call impact capital, then these are the ways that you should use the CSR as a strategy to differentiate yourself from others. So as you can see, all these three views are from a government's perspective, and then they have different implications. So our view is to use Hong Kong examples to see which kind of this view is more relevant Of course, we do not want to generalize to other countries, but just to show you that there are some evidence. Okay, so these are what the theory says. And then, now let's frame it in a more systematic way. Okay? If I'm the government, whether to regulate or not to regulate the CSR, I need to do my own cost-benefit analysis. So what is the benefit side? From the three previous views, we already see that the benefit may include overcome the market failure, enhance public goods provision by private firms, that's the societal governance view, improved societal governance, enhanced international competitiveness, so these are the perceived benefits. But these benefits must be balanced against those costs. What are the costs of CSR regulation? First, of course, significant cost of business. That's many business is worrying about. Okay? So in other words, for example, in India, you have to spend 2% of the net profits. Okay? For many business, actually, this is non-trivial. Okay? And then there are concerns whether CSR regulation will only benefit a few companies but harm the overall economy. That's also a valid concern. Also, whether the CSR regulation is good for large firms but detrimental to small and medium enterprise, this is also a legitimate concern. Okay? By the way, the empirical capacity will test this specifically. Another argument, whether CSR regulation creates, record, the non-tariff trade barrier, just another non-tariff trade barrier. And finally, don't forget that CSR regulation is costly. Okay? This costly is not only because, it's because first, legislation is costly. Okay? You need to educate the market, you need to do capacity building, you need to debate, lobbying, okay? And then policy formulated. And then monitoring and enforcement are also very costly. You need to have dedicated staff to do the monitoring. You need to have the ways of enforcement, both in the form of public enforcement and private litigations. All these can create dead weight loss. Okay? So in other words, when we look at these costs and benefits, whether to regulate or not to regulate is an empirical question. Okay, so we are interested to look at how government makes these decisions. Okay, now, Hong Kong. So by the way, how many of you have been to Hong Kong? Oh, most. Okay, good. Great. So why study Hong Kong? So we have to justify that Hong Kong is an interesting and important enough case to study. Okay, I think there are at least 3 reasons why we study Hong Kong. First, there's no doubt that Hong Kong is the world's freest economy. Okay? According to different rankings, Hong Kong is constantly top 3. Okay, for the consecutive 21 years. And then, when we say the freest economy means the cost of doing business is lowest. Okay, and then Hong Kong is also an international financial center. Okay, not comparable to New York and London, but in Asia, actually, it is like definitely an international financial center. And based on this, actually, that makes the studying of Hong Kong particularly interesting, because the government, in order to maintain its competitiveness, so it seriously concerns the cost of business. Okay, if CSR regulation imposed significant cost of business, the government is very hesitant to regulate. Okay, so that is why the government is always adopting this, we call it small government, large market kind of policy. Or in other words, positive non-interventionism policy. So a similar example is Singapore. Okay, now Hong Kong has CSR regulation, ESG reporting, but Singapore still not. It's very similar reason, because Singapore is also a small economy, financial center. Okay, so if something that can be voluntarily adopted, this consensus can be voluntarily adopted by the market, the government is very hesitant to regulate. Now we need to look at why the Hong Kong government finally decided to regulate. Okay, so And then the Hong Kong examples may be useful for other economies or exchanges who have similar competitiveness concern. This is one thing that we think Hong Kong is important. Second thing why I think Hong Kong is important is Hong Kong CSR regulations has broader implication on its neighboring global powerhouse, China. Okay, this is also one reason that why me and Canadian is doing the Hong Kong-Canada comparative study, because we think that Hong Kong and Canada are both neighbors to the world's two global powerhouses. Okay, so in Hong Kong, why Hong Kong CSR regulation is important for China? Remember, since China's economic reform in the late 1970s, Hong Kong has always been the largest foreign direct investment to China. Okay, and then right now on Hong Kong Stock Exchange, okay, about up to 50% of its market capitalization are companies from China. Okay, so in other words, these companies whose business is in China, they are incorporated in China but listed in Hong Kong. If Hong Kong enhances its ESG standard, the real CSR improvement effect happens in China. Okay? So in other words, we see that although Hong Kong is small, but its impact is going to be huge. And it is the largest companies that are listed in Hong Kong, state-owned enterprises. Okay? Mainly in the environmental sensitive industries. So that's the second reason. The third reason is data. Okay? Why studying Hong Kong? Hong Kong, we believe that has a very complete and unique data set. So I will show you what is this data advantages. They have very clear political communication documents, public consultation papers, submission details, which we do. And then the Hong Kong government, the EDP, the Environmental Protection Department, has kept surveys on the voluntary adoption, and then so in other words, these provides the basis for our discourse analysis and empirical study. So for these three reasons, we study Hong Kong. Okay, so now let's come to the part of CSR regulation. So several conceptual clarification. We have mentioned that CSR is previously considered voluntary. For example, ISO standard actually says CSR is something that ISO standard is actually very objective standard, which appeal to our context. It says CSR is these commitments that are complying with the law and exceeding the law. So it tries to clarify the relationship between CSR and the law. Okay? And we have to understand that CSR and law are not mutually exclusive. Okay? So for example, Crane and Matain, they talks about that laws are institutionalizing and codifying the CSR, and then trying to set a minimum acceptable standard of behavior. Okay? And then also David Dennett says CSR is something beyond the law, through the law, and for law. So in other words, the law and CSR is a dynamic process. Okay? Today this CSR may be voluntary, tomorrow it may become the law. And then the connotation of CSR is constantly growing. Okay? So you need to see this as a dynamic process. And then let's quickly narrow down our CSR regulation to our focus, which is called ESG reporting. So let me give you a brief background of this. What is ESG reporting? ESG reporting is company needs to report its environmental, social, and governance information. These information are considered non-financial information. So you may wonder why companies want to do this. This is a voluntary, it started as a voluntary response for investors and stakeholders' demand. Okay, so it's the investors who think that we need to know more, okay, go beyond financial information, because these are also important for us to understand the business, to evaluate the risks. Okay? there are many such companies that they are growing very well, but suddenly some accident happens, okay? And then it becomes collapsed. Okay? So originally it starts as a voluntary process, and then when companies do the ESG reporting, it can report in different forms. For example, it can just include this information in the annual report, or issue a separate CSR report, corporate responsibility report, corporate citizenship report, sustainability report. Okay, so the name doesn't matter. What we need is that information. So in this paper, we use the ESG. Okay, so this term mainly comes from the United Nations Global Compact in 2004 as a way to stress the importance of ESG issues. And there's no definitive list of what is ESG issues, but according to the GRI and other international standards, they mainly include these aspects: corporate governance, environmental protection, labor practices, community involvement, consumer issues, anti-corruption, supply chain management. So this is basically the big picture of what is ESG reporting. And we know that it started as a voluntary process. So voluntary means that companies can decide whether to disclose or not to disclose, how wide to disclose, in what format to disclose, and then whether to have my report being assured by a third party, we call ESG auditing. So there's this very inconsistency practice. So that is why many international conventions, guidelines are coming to being. The most famous is GRI, okay, unifies how you should report. And then it sets the 6 reporting principles: balance, comparability, accuracy, timeliness, clarity, and readability. And ISO is similar efforts on the 7 core aspects. The Carbon Disclosure Project is mainly on how you report the emissions, okay, water management and others. Okay, UN Global Compact is also this effort, and this is OECD is mainly on multinational corporations, and this is mainly on integrated reporting. So all these are these are the international standards developed to, and then these provide very useful reference to home country government. For example, Hong Kong heavily rely on these international standards to formulate its own ESG reporting. Okay, so just to show you that there are international efforts to standardize these practices. Okay, then when we talk about ESG reporting regulations, what do we mean? If we look at this word, when countries adopting ESG reporting, they mainly follow 3 levels. The highest level is called mandatory ESG reporting. So in other words, the law specifies black and white what items you must disclose. No excuse, you must disclose. Okay, so countries including like France, Denmark, India, South Africa, Malaysia. You may feel surprising that some developing countries are taking the pioneers in this mandatory standard. Okay, and then the middle approach, which is the Hong Kong's approach, is we call comply or explain approach. So this approach means I set the things that you must disclose, okay? And then you must comply, or if you cannot comply, you must explain. So explain why you cannot comply, right? So in other words, deviation from the required is not considered non-compliance if the issuer can provide considered reasons why it fails to disclose. So this considered reasons means you cannot just like tick the box, say it doesn't apply to me without providing any explanation. Okay, in Hong Kong's listing rule, it says this considered reasons needs to consider the specific circumstances, your company's own situation, complexity, the nature of your industry. So in other words, it must be considered reasons. And then usually this comply or explain approach is mainly to allow some flexibility of implementation. So it is a lower level lower than the mandatory. And the lowest level is called recommended best practice. So in other words, these countries' stock exchanges also include in their listing rule EULA, highly encouraged to disclose these things. But it is not mandatory. But many countries are using this as a transitional period towards this or this. So in other words, let the market adapt to those practices. So Hong Kong actually is moving from this to this in this last year. Okay? So these are the 3 levels of ESG reporting. So this picture is what I stole from the Harvard University. They have this initiative on responsible investment. So basically, it's small, but basically it says the green part are, sorry, there are many, maybe countries I'm not sure, these are countries. Green parts are those that are already ESG reporting requirements. So the dark green means these are requirements by the governments. This is requirements by stock exchanges. This is requirements by both government and stock exchanges. So in other words, the ESG reporting rule can come from both government or stock exchanges. This is a snapshot of 2015. So just to show you that these kind of requirements are common already. And this is a KPMG survey of largest 100 firms in 45 countries. So totally they have a sample of 4,500 companies. Okay? And then they looked at in the largest 100 firm in each country, what is the ESG reporting adoption rate. So they found that the top countries including South Africa, France, Denmark, UK, Norway, and others. So what is common in these countries is in the top 10, okay, highest adoption rate, those countries are all countries with mandatory ESG reporting. So in other words, law really matters. If you require something to be mandatory, the adoption rates increase. Okay. Okay. Now, come to my study. In this study, I use 2 research methodology. One is a qualitative one. One is a quantitative empirical one. The qualitative one is what we call it's not what we call, okay, it's a political discourse analysis. So this methodology is widely used in the social science. The nature of this discourse analysis is to read the texts. Okay? These texts may include the political communications, the policy, public consultation papers, people's submissions. And then to analyze these texts, but we must go beyond these texts. Okay, we need to look at who said them, okay, the identity of the submitter, and then we need to look at the broader socio-economic context